January 28th, 1986, the space shuttle, the Challenger, exploded a little over a minute into flight. This is recognized as one of United States' biggest tragedies and something that could have been completely preventable. After researching and finding out what exactly happened and what went wrong, I'm going to answer 3 questions to share my opinion of what NASA could have done better, what some of the engineers could have done better, and what NASA should be doing, or US in general should be doing to prevent things like this from ever happening again. In the 80s, the United States launched 32 space shuttle flights. That's a lot. That's a lot in a decade. And I think there was a real pressure for that success, a real push for that to happen. The United States was in a space race still with the European Space Agency. I think that put a lot of expectations on them to get the astronauts out, push the flights, push the schedules. There was a lot of limitations that were ignored because of this small time frame or this need to be number one and be first. I think that was one of the first things that I realized, is that there was such a push that there wasn't much time to see if they were doing the right things with the shuttles, to making sure that they were safe. Even Fickle, who was the contracted engineer to build the solid rocket space, he knew about the problem in the 70s, and he had hired an engineer team to figure out the problem. And it was kind of chancy because they contracted this rocket design and they were using it, and they began to see a problem and they continued using it. So they continued using this rocket and this design, even though they could have had an accident even earlier than the Space Challenger. I think when managers are pushed to get a product out, they cut corners. They don't really think about the consequences of a small corner being cut. Even in the document, it was said to that there wasn't enough evidence provided that there's any safety to be concerned about, because they've never been in temperatures as cold as what the engineers thought would be damaging to the O-ring, which is the cause of the Challenger explosion. So there's a lot that they could have done. I think listening to who they hired for what they hired them for, instead of ignoring them, slowing down, doing quality flights, quality missions, and not just trying to be number one. So that's the first thing that I think NASA could have done differently. The second question that I'm answering is, what could Roger Boyce Jolly have done better or have done to prevent this? And I think that question was a little misleading when it was asked, because it said to remember that he had a family, and at his age he wouldn't be able to find another job. So it almost made it as though he ignored problems, that he wasn't sharing his secrets, but he was voicing his opinion. Him and his other engineer, Thompson, were saying things. They were doing stuff. They weren't staying quiet. They were saying, hey, we don't really have any significant data showing that this is safe. Like, we're going against all our feelings. We have a gut feeling that this isn't good. And they were ignored. So I guess really the rational thing to say is make a phone call. It all goes back to that communication. There was a meeting the night before, and the next crew and the managers didn't know that the meeting had happened. They didn't know about the temperatures, how they could lower, or the conditions where the O-ring could slip out of place and cause some really huge hazards. A call, a memo, an email, something to where the information was passed on to the next set of managers, the next set of crew. And that's really what I can think of. Other than that, he tried. I guess you tried. So the last and final question is, what do I think could have been done? My whole talk has been on communication, and I'm going to stick with that. Another thing that I'd add in is checks and balances. There was a lot of iffy decisions going on. Uh, there were a lot of people being ignored, and then there was a sign off that wasn't approved by the engineers. It was approved by one person. So instead of one person saying, this is good, this is what we need to do, uh, it has to be signed off by person A, B, and C. Uh, it's checks to make sure that everybody agrees, and if it's not unanimous, then you shouldn't move forward with it. If it's a huge safety concern, you shouldn't move forward with it. Uh, Even if you are trying to be number one, if you're trying to be first, it needs to be put in place. And then a communication where everybody talks to everyone. Everyone says, this is our concerns. What are your concerns? Do they line up with our concerns? Are they preventable? What can we do to make sure something like this doesn't happen again, or something tragic doesn't happen to people that put their lives on the lines? Planning and listening, really listening, really listening.